We know from Dan Brown's witness statement at the Holy Blood, Holy Grail trial in London that in 2000 and 2001, Dan Brown and his wife were desperate and broke. They were peddling angels and demons out of the trunk of their car here in New England. He sold a synopsis of the Da Vinci Code to a publisher in New York City. He began writing it, but by the summer of 2002, he had another serious problem develop. Now this is where the real fun begins, because Dan had now produced an entire second part within 3 to 4 months, because the publisher wanted to release the story in March of 2003. So, solving his dilemma, Dan decided that he was just going to go back to the Vatican Boys and copy everything in the second part of the story into his book, The Da Vinci Code. So if you look at the story chapter by chapter, as we've talked about before, there's sequential copying from the Vatican Boys that created the entire second part of the Da Vinci Code. The story transitions from France to London. Out of all the streets in London, all of the characters arrive on Fleet Street. There's mention in the text of both books of demons, of gargoyles, the old city fire of 1666. Believe it or not, a miracle happens. Blackfriars Bridge, Victoria's Embankment. As incredible as it might sound, a 5-letter password is figured out by the male. It has to do with the French female's past life. A man of the Opus Dei is seen trussed at his feet. The words are there. In the back seat of a car. It's a kidnapping. The number sequence code is broken by the male to get the secret at the knight's private bank. The head of the Opus Dei arrives in a private Catholic jet and goes directly to the Opus Dei house. The Catholic Church does not have a private jet, but this appears in both books. And then we move on to the climax scenes, the very important portion of the story where everything begins to come together. The secret is uncovered in London by the male and the female. They have outwitted the chief secretary to the Pope and his hired assassin. The teacher leads us to the relic linked to the blood of Jesus Christ. The same characters are seen at the Opus Dei house, at the Embankment Gardens in London. Brown describes rain is falling harder as they approach it. This is the same as when the characters of the Vatican Boys approach the same Opus Dei house in London. They are greeted by someone who has a dumb smile. They are not mentally astute. They go upstairs. The French woman finds a clue. The clue is hidden in a slit in the backing of a painting. This phrase, a slit in the backing of a painting, appears in both the Vatican Boys and in the Da Vinci Code. An old lady appears who knows things about the Catholic Church, but they're hiding about the secret wealth, and especially about a brotherhood's history. The lone assassin of the chief secretary to the Pope ends his role exhausted and delirious at a London hospital. The male and the female who have outwitted the secretary and his assassin to get the secret bring evidence exposing the chief secretary for his treachery to a famous holy church. The chief secretary does not get the secret. His motivation in the entire story of the Vatican Boys, Angels and Demons, the Da Vinci Code, is to become the next pope. The book ends, all the books end, with an epilogue. The remains of a revered old woman are kept underground in a cave in a golden urn. So Dan gave all this to his publisher, and the Da Vinci Code was published, and the rest of the story is, as they say, history. Dan has gone on to make billions and billions of dollars, gain world fame, all from copying this one story from the Vatican Boys. In both of my lawsuits against Dan Brown, no jury trials or evidence inspections were allowed by the United States federal courts. Now, going back to part 1, we talked about numerical probability. Anything more than 7 substantial similarities is impossible to be thought about by 2 authors creating the same story in sequence. In just these 3 parts of my explanations of Dan Brown's copying, I've listed over 100. So you figure out what's 100 times impossible. Will the truth of this copying the greatest literary crime in history ever come out? That remains to be seen. What's happened so far is a sign of the times.